Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Domestic Violence Awareness Month Law Enforcement Consortium. I appreciate everyone's attendance and time you've taken out of your Friday evening to join us, which for this, what I consider to be a very important topic, not only for this month, but year round. So without further ado, I would like to give an opportunity. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Marco Bareno. I'm the Chief Safety Officer for the Southwestern College Police Department. And we have a great group here of expert knowledge on the subject pertaining to law enforcement and domestic violence. So I'll pass it over to, why don't we start with you, Mr. Alexander Calica, give a brief introduction and we'll go around the room.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Calica and I'm the security manager for National University, and I'm really glad to be here, and I just feel very fortunate that I'm partaking in a very important topic.
Thank you. Chief Moore.
Evening. Thank you for your interest in this important subject. My name is Chris Moore. I'm the Chief of Police at Palomar College in San Marcos, California. I have been in law enforcement just over 30 years and sadly have responded to hundreds of domestic violence incidents and see how they damage and impact, sometimes long lasting, to communities and families. And so anything we can do to help educate our campus community to prevent those relationships, and we have a vast knowledge of prosecutors and DAs and community members and people involved in the Violence Against Women Act to help support the campus community and make sure people have a safe environment to live.
Thank you. Deputy District Attorney Justine Santiago.
Yes, hello, my name is Justine Santiago. I work at the District Attorney's Office and I'm currently assigned to the Family Protection Unit up in North County. As you're aware, or may not be aware, the Family Protection Unit covers and deals with the domestic violence related crime in San Diego County. So it is a very important topic to me and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And Chief Deputy at San Diego City Attorneys, Rebecca Zipp.
Hi, Rebecca Zipp. I'm the Chief Deputy of the Domestic Violence and Sex Crimes Unit at the City Attorney's Office. And I have very exciting news, which is that the governor just signed SB 538, which will make it easier for people seeking domestic violence restraining orders to obtain those orders remotely and to e-file documents needed for those. So that's hot off the press this afternoon. So that's a great step in the right direction.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it, especially like I said on a Friday. It just confirms your dedication to the subject. So I really appreciate it. What I want to start, since we don't have any people that joining in, we most likely are not going to get any questions. I would like to just provide the information out there. Possibly, Ms. Yanma, if you can help us putting out contact information at a later date for the people that actually watch the recording, that'd be very helpful. Initially, I want to start with just explaining a little bit of a history for the Domestic Violence Awareness Month for those that are not aware that are watching this. Domestic Violence Awareness Month evolved from the Day of Unity in October 1981, observed by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The intent was to connect advocates across the nation who were working to end violence against women and their children. In October 1987, the first Domestic Violence Awareness Month was observed, and in 1989, the U.S. Congress passed public law designating October as the year, in that year, celebrating the first National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So, having said that, there's certain topics that we kind of distributed prior to us getting together. So, what I'll do is I will turn the table over to Mr. Alexander Calica for him to give us a little bit of a review on the awareness and changes of domestic relationships. Mr. Calica?
Thank you, Chief. Probably one of the most important things that I've noticed over the years, especially being involved with students, is the possibility and often the essential changes that go on in their personal relationships, either at home or with their friends, regarding their development as students. It's natural for students, as they progress and as they develop and mature, to begin to change themselves as far as their attitudes are concerned, and their interests. And often within their personal relationships, these changes have a tendency of causing conflict. Interpersonal relationships are very, very complex. And often they can be sources of conflict, especially if somebody within a relationship begins to change. Students, by definition, by nature, they come to college because they want to change, they want to improve, they want to seek those goals, they want to strive, and they want to better themselves. Often this causes concern with personal relationships. It could be parents, it could be a parent, it could be siblings, it could be significant others. When the outside people see those changes, sometimes that can be cause for concern, and sometimes it actually can cause fear and uncertainty. And when you have fear and uncertainty in a relationship, then you start getting conflict. And so my feeling, my desire is to let students know that when they see these changes, or sense these changes within their relationships, let them know that it has nothing really to do with them in a negative way, but it just for them to be aware that because they're bettering themselves, they may cause the people around them to look at them differently, to be actually sometimes to fear change. And so everyone who is who feels stable within a relationship, if that relationship begins to change, then sometimes that causes conflict. So remember that if you have conflict in your life because you're a student and because you are seeking your goals, and you feel like there's conflict around you, it may not necessarily be emanating from you, because your focus is to improve yourself. Your focus is to always strive for those goals. Being aware of your impact on the people around you is important, just so that you can understand maybe what the people around you are going through. So as a student, you have lots of years ahead of you, and you're going to go through a lot of changes, and you're going to go through a lot of development. And as important as the people around you are, and sometimes as supportive that these people can seem, sometimes when it comes right down to your personal development as a student and as a person, the support might wane and might be in question by those around you. So just be aware of the fact that you are changing and you're maturing and you're seeking and striving those goals. Just be aware that that alone may cause certain changes in your relationships, and especially in your personal relationships.
Thank you, Mr. Calica. One thing that pops in my mind a lot in terms of when you're talking about schools and universities, there's one thing that actually is very, very repetitive and common, unfortunately. It's the dating and the stalking violence issues. And for that specific topic, I would like to refer to Mr. Chief Moore and District Attorney Justine Santiago, if they can provide their input on that subject again.
Thank you. As domestic violence, we often think of the four walls of a home, an apartment, a dorm, And what violence occurs there between traditionally parents, domestic partners, blood relatives, parents of children. But really, the VAWA law is really expanded to talk about dating violence, that there doesn't have to be that specific relationship, that if there's unwelcomed violence, verbal abuse, that is something that's unacceptable, and the police and the DA and the city attorney can be involved as well. Really, one of the central themes in domestic violence and dating violence is control. Someone trying to control your behavior, trying to control where you're at, to make you disclose things that could make you feel uncomfortable. And so sadly, as technology has improved, so have the platforms to do that. And stalking is that traditional thing that you see depicted in movies where somebody is at a place that you did not welcome them. And the sad part about school is often we have a school schedule that we know we're going to be somewhere Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so someone could be a classmate that they are always there early, or they wonder where your next class is. And you just have to be protective about sharing that information, about posting it on social media, just what your normal habits are. People love to put on Instagram what they found at Whole Foods, but that you're also telegraphing that you're at Whole Foods. And a lot of us are creatures of habit, where they go to the same places. Maybe we have a dog and we go to the same park. People that want to potentially do us harm or want to insert themselves into our lives can use those things against us. And as I mentioned before, stalking comes in where it's unwelcome. If you did not invite that person, you did not place an invitation, you didn't text message them to say come. And so once again, the control that there is a relationship, but it may not be a prescribed relationship, as in the domestic violence penal code. And Justine, do you want to talk a little bit about how technology has expanded that platform for people to try to harm another person?
Yes, thank you. So kind of echoing first of all with regards to posting information on social media. A lot of times you'll have situations where you're sharing information about not only where you are, but who you're with, certain aspects of your daily routine that make it easier for someone to find you, to know things about you, to learn things about you, and then to use that against you. So we do find that it has made it easier in some situations to escalate from normal unwanted behavior into criminal stalking. So it is important to be mindful on that regard. To kind of also, on the other flip side of it, to kind of show how social media and technology and all this type of communication, electronic communication within relationships have been used recently in domestic violence types of relationship is a situation of revenge porn, right? You have situations where you have someone using personal identifying information for you, intimate photographs, videos, and using that in a way that now that they have that electronic, I guess, evidence against you, they would start to use that in a way to manipulate you, to get you to do what you want, to control you, going after what Chief Moore said. It's all about control. So it's another way of them to control your behavior, get you to do what you want to do. And a lot of times these things don't get reported because of fear of retaliation, because of fear of them following through on it. So that's another platform, another way for offenders to be able to use social media, to use electronic means of communication against you, and to use that to further manipulate. So not only with regards to trying to physically find you or to learn this stuff about you, but again, to manipulate it in the other regard if they have that information against you. So those are just different ways that we've kind of seen or found that there is that shift in how that's being used and applied with domestic violence and stalking type behavior.
Justine, if I could ask you, a lot of times with the revenge porn, someone might have shame that they were in a compromising position, or may have sent a picture as a gesture, but now it's being used. Can you talk about how your victim advocates and how your office helps support folks with that?
Very much so. So one of the first things that I oftentimes let our victims and my victim advocates also let our victims know is that this is not their fault. It is very personal. It's very embarrassing a lot of the times. What they have to know and what we try to reiterate is that we support them because what they are going through is not their fault. It is very sensitive. It's very difficult a lot of times for someone to make that initial report, for law enforcement to be aware that these pictures even exist. But it is my position personally, people I work with, the advocates, to really emphasize that there is no judgment being placed on the victim, that they've done nothing wrong. They are the victim in the case. And while it may seem as if they're the ones on trial, they are doing the right thing by reporting it, to stop this type of behavior, to break that cycle of control, and to really let them know that we support them despite all the shame or feeling of guilt that they got themselves into that position.
Thank you, Justine. And you know what, that's very important. I think most people don't know the services that they can actually go and get, and let alone the fact of what needs to be reported or what actually makes a DVA, right? Oftentimes we have this erroneous idea of what that is. A lot of people do, especially with different cultural backgrounds. I think that's a big issue that we run. One of the things that I'm very interested in hearing what victim advocacy support programs each individual office has. So I'm going to take this segue to ask Chief Deputy Rebecca Zipp, what does your office what role does your office play in domestic violence and prevention, and what kind of victim advocacy support do they offer? If you can share that with us.
Sure. So we have 3 devoted victim service coordinators in the city attorney's office. Our victim services coordinators are non-confidential, which is different from the district attorney's office. Their victim advocates are confidential. So if someone is working with the DA's office, what they tell their victim advocate will not be shared with the district attorney on their case. That's a carve out in the advocates confidential for district attorney's offices, but since we're a municipal agency, we don't have that confidentiality. So that's the main difference. The services we offer are very similar. If they need money to pay them back, if their abuser vandalized property, destroyed property, we can help them get a refund through the state victim compensation board. Our victim service coordinators will walk them through that sometimes Byzantine process. Additionally, we constantly refer victims for low cost or free counseling services, for low cost or free legal services, including getting a civil restraining order where there's just not enough evidence to support filing of a criminal case. It's a lower burden of proof in the civil courtroom. And so we're in touch with local agencies that can assist with that. And we also have Your Safe Place, a family justice center downtown, which provides similar services. It's a one-stop shop with in-house resources for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. There's various nonprofits housed right there to assist. There's counselors right there. And there are even family protection police detectives in the same building available to speak to crime victims, photograph injuries, medical professionals to do a domestic abuse forensic exam, for example. And the district attorney's office is launching its North County Family Justice Center, Our Safe Place, soon. So I guess Justine can tell us more about that. And I'm sure they'll offer a lot of those services as well. And as I mentioned earlier, SB 538 is the law. During the pandemic, of course, we all had virtual court appearances where before those types of appearances were often not authorized. But throughout the pandemic at the Family Justice Center, they've assisted with victims, and they now have a dedicated room where a victim can go to the Family Justice Center, log on to court from that safe location, and tell the judge why she needs a restraining order or why he needs a restraining order, all from that office and with all of the support that it has to offer, including childcare, if that's a service that they need, so that they can go ahead and make that court appearance. We also have the high risk team, but I've talked a long time. So Justine, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, that it was a good segue, because that's one of the things that we have at the DA's office, city attorney's office. countywide, whether it's out in East County, South Bay, North County, or downtown. It's a collaborative effort by different law enforcement agencies, the DA's office, different victim advocacy groups, where we work together on referrals for high-risk victims. So there's an entire criteria that we have where if you believe that a victim is high risk for domestic violence or death, they could qualify for this multidisciplinary type of program where we work together to try and give wraparound services to victims. For example, you'll have victims who are afraid to leave their abusers because they're afraid of losing support for their family, for their children, financial support, whatever it may be. They know that their name's not on the lease. So if they were to leave, they have nowhere to go. So we meet monthly in order to talk about these cases to figure out how we can help them. We have people, for example, from the Women's Resource Center in Oceanside saying, you know what, we have a placement for a bed for them. We have people from Community Service for Solutions coming in saying, you know what, I think we can provide them counseling. And it's a way for us to work together to figure out the best way to help these victims of domestic violence, the ones who are really at high risk. So it's another form of victim advocacy that we have, in addition to the victim advocates within the city attorney's office and the DA's office who work on specific cases. Sometimes these victims don't have active cases, like Rebecca had mentioned, that we don't feel that we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, but we know that these people need help, that they need resources. It's another way for us to reach out and to help those victims.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm glad, William, you have that question posted regarding the effects of COVID and victims and how that's increased the level of response, at least from the law enforcement side, when it pertains to domestic violence cases. And I think the fact that having people being inside homes without any form of going to work or talking to other people or just socializing has increased these types of behaviors, unfortunately. I think it's very important to point out I think there's a lot of confusion, especially when there's a different culture background, to identify what constitutes domestic violence. Am I truly a victim? And I think knowing where the resources are, it's paramount. But also identifying whether there's a problem is also very important. And I think we lack sometimes the connection of both, and especially with students and young adults and yeah. So what I want to review, and hopefully when people are watching, I want them to understand a little bit more of the domestic violence and what it pertains, what can include. It's not just physical violence. We're talking about obviously sexual violence, including threats, intimidation, physical force, but also emotional, right? And the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse, the psychological intimidation that occurs. And there's even instances where spiritual abuse is often used, especially on the cultural backgrounds where they're very intertwined with their religion, including using religion as a form of threatening or intimidating someone. There's also the financial abuse, right, aspect that we rarely talk about, including, controlling finances, forcing a partner to work, or prohibiting a partner from working at all, right, based on that. The harassment, obviously, of stalking, including monitoring their activities online, which we already spoke. That's huge right now because of technology. So those are aspects that we want to get out there to all students and our communities to know, to at least detect where there's an issue. And if you're not a person suffering from being mistreated or being a victim of domestic violence, at least recognize if someone is, and what can they do to actually reach out for help. Because often, like it was mentioned earlier, people, whether it might be for embarrassment or whatever, they don't report it, or simply because they think that is the way, because they've had this history of family behavior that's been going on generation after generation, and they don't see it as a thing to report. And I think that's very that makes the problem very big, or bigger, I should say. While 80% of survivors of domestic violence, tell their family members, only 30% statistically reported to law enforcement. So I see that as an issue because we're not fixing the actual problem or actually getting these people the help that they need. Also reviewing who's affected by domestic violence, right? And what kind of, well, it's not only women, men can experience domestic violence as well. Women are overwhelmingly impacted. 7 out of 10, I do believe, according to statistics for domestic violence, are women. But it's also, it also brings back what kind of effects does this have on the victims, right? What are the telltale signs that someone is going through this, or what's left behind on victims? It can be anything from ongoing anxiety, depression, distress, eating disorders, sleeping disorders. That's on top of the typical notion of bruising or physical harm that we usually gravitate towards when we're talking about domestic violence. So for me, it's also, I think there's a huge problem in the LGBTQ community. They are often victims of this crime and often not reported. So to me, that's something that I recently went to a course not too long ago from people from Austin, Texas, that were providing this training on how to interview people that were victims of domestic violence when it came to the LGBT community. How do you question? How do you talk to them? How do you get information from them? It's a different kind of approach. So I think recognizing or helping people recognize there's a problem, or educating people on how to detect if there's an issue going, the all of a sudden isolation of someone, people not showing for work, not calling in, the depression, the anxiety that you notice someone, those telltale signs, I think they're important not only for the victim to know them, but also the people that surround them, the family members and friends. And once we get these issues reported, then we can actually start working on helping each individual victims. I think we have, as we expressed already, there's so many avenues that we can help. Laws going into effect, programs that we have, and everything. But at the end of the day, it takes the victim to come forth and report the actual issue in order for us to help them. So I think that becomes a very important topic for us to review. So any other input that anyone might have in terms of domestic violence for this topic?
Sure. So you touched on LGBTQ plus couples, and before 1995, they were not protected by California's domestic violence laws. Only married couples were, and same-sex couples could not get married. So in 1995, the law changed to include same-sex couples as well as people with a dating relationship. Relationships that are not protected under the domestic violence laws include relationships that just involve sexual contact. So if it's a one-time hookup, if you talk one night and that's it, that's not considered a relationship for domestic violence purposes. Now, that's not to say if violence does occur, there are still regular assault laws that would cover it, but it wouldn't fall under the domestic violence umbrella. There is a lot of confusion as to what constitutes domestic violence. Justine and I live and die by Penal Code Section 1203.097. It is very long. You do not have to read it. But that and Family Code Section 6211 govern what constitutes a relationship for domestic violence purposes in the criminal context. But I believe there is even some confusion at the state legislative level based on some new diversion laws we've seen. So it's illegal to divert someone from the criminal justice system if they've committed a domestic violence offense in California. So diversion is when, the judge says, all right, why don't you get some counseling and we'll throw out the case. It's a little more structured than that, but that's a short version of it, as opposed to a criminal conviction, possible jail time. there have been a number of new diversion laws introduced in California. So it's expanded the classes of crimes for which someone can have the case thrown out after complying with a program that the judge has imposed. The legislature specifically excluded two penal code sections that are basically the bread and butter of domestic violence: injury on a corporal injury on a partner, and battery on a partner. But any crime that someone commits against their spouse or dating partner is considered domestic violence. So in my unit, we've charged theft as a domestic violence offense. We've charged brandishing a weapon. We frequently charge vandalism and other types of crimes. So basically, if you're in any sort of long-term relationship, or were in the past and the person is being abusive, that constitutes domestic violence. And again, in the civil context, last year, a new law said that controlling behaviors can be considered in restraining order violation applications. So it used to be that you had to show there was some sort of abuse. And now, even absent physical abuse, you can show, he's very jealous. He takes the modem or the Wi-Fi router with him to work during the day so that I can't access it. He controls my bank account. Those types of behaviors can lay the groundwork for a restraining order, and I'm hoping increasingly will play a role in the courtroom in criminal domestic violence cases.
That is excellent information, and that's the information precisely that I was referring to get this information out, because it's I doubt that a lot of people are aware of those connections and how can they be determined as part of domestic violence. And so I really appreciate you putting that input out there so people can actually watch this and learn it. Another question that I had, maybe one of you can help me out, kind of dive in a little bit if you guys have experience on it. It is often known that Indigenous women, as you know, there's a lot of reservations around. We have students down here that are from reservations that attend schools. Indigenous women are 3 times more likely to experience violent victimization over non-Indigenous women. And it's not to say that education plays a part or anything like that, but it's just, I think it's the cultural behavior of certain groups, whether it might be that they transfer over to their children. We've seen more and more behaviors with students that act in the same way their parents are with their significant others in college, while in class, even out in the parking lot. So as far as cases, do you have any information? And I guess this question would be directed to you, Justine and Rebecca, in terms of that. Have you guys seen any issues with that?
I can start. I don't have any concrete statistics or specific information with regards to cases involving Indigenous women. I will say that there are oftentimes difficult to prosecute those cases because of the nature of the community. People not necessarily wanting to cooperate, whether there were witnesses that don't want to come forward because of that stigma. So I think that may play a part in whether someone reports to begin with, whether they know or believe that maybe nothing will come of it because it can't be proven anyway. So they kind of stop the reporting. But with regards to any specific statistics, I don't have any information with that, but I do sometimes see that they may be more difficult to issue because we may not be able to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt because of all the surrounding issues that are intertwined with those types of cases.
And I'll add that, for plenty of good reason, our Native communities have distrust of government and law enforcement. Who wouldn't, right? Given how our country has treated our Native peoples. And so that's created a huge challenge. A lot of the reservations are not on good land. They're far away from resources, far away from things like Wi-Fi sometimes. And so it's just extremely isolating. COVID has hit these communities extremely hard. I know that Your Safe Place is partnering with local agencies that specifically serve our Indian communities. And it's located in North County, where they tend to be more centered, rather than downtown San Diego. We do have Indian Health Services in San Diego. And I have been heartened to see, ever since Deborah Haaland took over the Department of Interior at the federal level, she's the first Native person in that role. She's really amplified the plight of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. I think we've seen a lot of that in national media. Interestingly enough, because of the disappearance of a white woman from Florida who was probably murdered by her partner. But that has been a jumping ground for families of missing Black men, missing Indigenous women, to come forward and say, how come our stories don't receive more attention in the media, and has actually served to place a spotlight on some of those stories. So I think there's definitely work to do from the prosecution and law enforcement communities to build trust. And I don't think it's something we're going to get done in a year or 2 years. It's just going to be an ongoing effort based on all of the history.
You're absolutely right. And that resonates with me. I had a chance to work for 4 years in a reservation. So there was a lot of issue, you're right, with trust issues with law enforcement and cooperating and even reporting any types of crimes. And the levels of domestic violence within those areas were very high. And they were noticeable, but never reported. So I concur 100% that does happen from personal experience. So what I would like to share as well, so the public get to hear it when they see our video. It's the any suggestions on warning signs and that third parties may be red flags per se that they could notice on someone else, so they can actually promote these victims to report their crimes. Because I do believe, I truly believe that's a big issue. So any recommendation of that, and that's, I guess, Chief Moore and Mr. Calica, if you have any input on what kind of warning signs would be. I've thought about a few that me in my career that I've expected, which is just, someone being put down and often, someone being talked over, that kind of bulliness that goes around in conversations, and it's in merely social gatherings, right? It's like, no, you're wrong. Always putting that person down. That to me raises a flag whenever I'm seeing someone that talks like that to their significant other, especially in a social gathering. That to me is a red flag. But any other opinions on that?
I think we have talked about a little bit with COVID, isolation. So as it was mentioned, people aren't going to work. So the cliche, a bruise to an eye or something physical change, but also a partner that wants to isolate you from your family and break you from routines. And I think, if you talk to your sister every Friday after work and all of a sudden she doesn't call you on Fridays, but she's also talked about that she's been on a dating app and she's been seeing someone, and that perhaps there's a reason that she is not doing that. And one of the abusers' control tools is isolation. Right. And then they create that shame to the victim, and that they're the access point for their relationship, and then jealousy and manipulation. And so there's a lot of tools that they use, but I think that's the family and our close friends, even just checking in with people. I think that's a theme with COVID as well. Just we've lost track of people we haven't seen from work, people we used to do social things. So just checking in with people and make sure they're okay, and asking a few more questions. Well, why do you feel that way? Well, how do they make you feel that way? What are they doing about it? So those are some other points that came to mind.
Absolutely. Well, for one thing, I have to say something. I'm actually kind of pleased that we didn't get the questions as much, because we got a lot of information. It always, I know I keep saying I'm going to go and visit your office, Chief, and one of these days, I promise I will. I'll get out of here and go visit you, because I think working in partnership is key. I think we all see the same issues over and over again, and it's through collaboration that we actually can help the victims and actually make a difference. I want to thank Ms. Justine Santiago, Ms. Rebecca Zipp for coming down and joining us, Mr. Alexander Calica for joining us as well. And of course, My partner from the north, I'll return that comment back to you, sir. Thank you for joining us today on this Friday. I really appreciate all of your input. And what I'll do is I'll make sure, Ms. Janma, we do have all their contacts, of course, so we can provide that at
Sure.
a later date. Okay.
I will
sounds good.
provide the email address and I will
Perfect.
post it on YouTube. Oh, Chief Bareno, I have a question actually.
Sure.
I'm curious about the role of bystanders. Like, how can bystanders help stop violent behaviors? Let's say I have a friend, I believe she is abused by her partner, but she doesn't want to report to law enforcement. Can I report to law enforcement in this case?
Well, this is the thing. Yes, I mean, it's always, you can always report it to law enforcement, but the things that I always suggest to people, especially if you have a relationship with someone that's suffering through a domestic violence, is first of all, building the rapport, because it's very hard sometimes for them to come out and actually say it. We get often reports of domestic violence, and once we actually talk to the victim, they completely negate anything wrong, right? Oh, I was just joking. I was just joking with my friend. I never. So it's a hinder to the investigation to actually move forward whenever a victim, and that's even through rapes that we've gone through the same thing. They adamantly say nothing happened. It's a full non-cooperative kind of way that they just don't want to cooperate with law enforcement or the district attorney. They don't want to meet anyone. So it's really hard to move forward. What I always recommend is building a rapport with, you might already have it with a person you know, but most of all is believing what they're telling you the initial time. Because the initial time when they actually share their stories, when they're most vulnerable and more willing to talk and provide more information. So be supportive and listen. Be a great listener. That's what it comes down to. Ask them, how can you help them? Because if they're telling you most of the time, it's because it's a cry out for help. What area they want to be non-judgmental, right? Unfortunately, I'm not saying obviously that's your case by any shape or form, but you will see a lot of victims reach out to friends, family, or people they know, and at the first judgmental comment that comes back at them, they shut down and they never share that again. So that's very important. Support them to create a safety plan, even if they don't want to report it. Okay, arranging a small bag with all the essentials they need, whether they have kids, the childcare, opening a personal bank account in advance, just any other tips, depending on what kind of relationship you have with that person. There's different pointers that you can provide them so they can actually help themselves out. And most of all, where to reach out for help, right? Crisis hotlines, if there's students, right, coming down, who to talk to in the campus. A lot of the times, unfortunately, and was just expressed by I do believe Rebecca and Justine, they mentioned the fact that they're not very cooperative with law enforcement. They don't want to talk to law enforcement, whether they don't want to, not because they don't trust law enforcement so much, but maybe because they don't want to get someone in trouble. So what happens is sometimes pushing them towards reporting to a third party, whether it might be if they're a student, for example, student affairs or Title IX, right? At least get the information out so the investigation starts actually moving forward. It is very hard for some people to come and talk to a uniform because they automatically think someone's going to jail. And sometimes that person is going to jail. The first fear is financial. What am I going to do after he goes to jail? He's the one who pays the bills. I don't work. I haven't worked in 16 years. What happens to me and my kids? So that becomes a major issue. So any other opinions on this subject, my colleagues?
I would just say on the bystander part is if you're a roommate or you're a family member and someone is talking about someone they're in a relationship with, insist that they meet them, out socially. But that's how offenders also manipulate, is by anonymity. And, we can meet someone digitally through a platform, and we may not even know if that's the real person. Sadly, our friends at the DA's office could, someone misrepresenting themselves as well. So I think that's another way that family, friends, you're talking about someone all the time, hey, have them over, let's go out and meet. And that way the offender knows too, there are people in your influence that are going to look out for you and question if things aren't going well. And a lot of times that allows them to pull back if they know you have support, because if they can get you isolated, then they know they can control.
What I hear both Chief Bareno and Chief Moore say is that kind of be careful if you're going to call law enforcement. If you have a relationship with the person that you feel is being abused, and this person is close to you, and you have a close friendship relationship, by calling the police, you could actually change your relationship dynamic with that person. And that person may lose confidence in you if you are if that person is trying to, if you're that person's confidant. And so I would hazard a guess that the best thing to do is what Chief Bareno was mentioning. Try to find ways in which you can support your friend other than initially with that knee-jerk reaction calling law enforcement, because initially that just might distance you from your friend that you're so concerned about. So the very thing that you're really concerned about in saving your friend, and then thinking that maybe calling law enforcement first will help save that person, may very well be counterproductive in your ability to be influential in that person for that person to find safe places and safe ways to get out of that particular relationship.
Well, wow, this went quick. We got 9 minutes for our meeting to be over. That was, it felt only like 15 minutes. So that was a lot of information. I really appreciate everyone. If there's any additional questions, please feel free. If they're not posted right here, please feel free to email them. Jan, if you can actually provide those questions later to me, and I can disseminate them to my colleagues to actually provide the information needed for those that actually watch this video at a later time. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time this Friday afternoon to come down and talk. I do believe that even though we had a very small public connected to us right now, this information will resonate for the people watching it afterwards. So I really appreciate your time and out of your busy schedules. Thank you. Thank you all.